The UK is in an economic crisis. Labour have been disastrous. They're shooting inflation up, they're forcing unemployment up, they're borrowing an extra £120 billion in their first year in government, but sadly, everything is about to be getting worse. We've been listening to Labour's leaks for tax rises to come over the last couple of months in the run-up to their budget, and so far it all sounded like a disaster. And make no mistake, be under no illusion, you will be poorer in 1 year's time from today than you are right now, specifically because of the traitorous decisions of this Labour government. And whilst that certainly is the case, because socialism simply doesn't work, we still need to know the details. So in this video, I'm going to break down exactly what was in Labour's most recent attack on us all within their budget, and I'm going to explain the real consequences of the tax rises that we're all about to have forced upon us, and also how you can protect yourself from this disastrous government. Now let's start off by going through not actually the budget itself, but the OBR forecast. This is the government-owned body which is supposed to be economically literate and tell us all what's going to happen over the next year. Is inflation going to go up? Are things going to get more expensive? Are we going to get richer and make more money? Well, no, we're going to get a little bit poorer, with all of our growth forecasts for the following 4 years being downgraded. But let's get into the detail right here. So the UK economy is expected to grow at a slower rate than previously expected from next year, the official forecast has said. The OBR, which maps out how the economy is set to perform based on the government's tax and spending policies, increased its growth expectations for this year. By the way, this year has 1 month left in it, but has downgraded its forecast for the following 4 years. It said lower productivity growth, a measure of output of the economy per hour worked, was behind the weaker growth forecast. In this forecast, the OBR predicted the economy would grow by 1.5% this year, whereas the previous estimate was 1%, but it said growth of the following years would be lower. 1.4% for 2026, 1.5% in the following 4 years, all of which are downgrades from where their forecast sat back in March of 2025. We expect quarterly growth to pick up only gradually in the near term as geopolitical uncertainty persists and domestic business and consumer confidence remains subdued. That's the really important thing here. Business and consumer confidence is subdued means that people and businesses aren't investing or spending in the economy because we know we're just going to be taxed into oblivion, so what's the point? And they even mentioned this, the OBR, including in anticipation of further tax rises. In her budget speech, the Chancellor said the government had beat the growth forecast this year and that we will beat them again. Yes, well, the following growth forecasts are looking an awful lot worse. The OBR also said that in isolation, the reduction in productivity growth could have lowered government revenues by about £16 billion by the time we get to the end of this decade. What that really means is that the government is not collecting £16 billion in taxes that it would have expected to, simply because we will be poorer and so the government won't have as much to tax. That is a pretty disastrous number alone. The OBR said that that's okay because the government has announced tax rises to make up for us being poorer. So they are literally going to increase our taxes because we're going to be too poor to pay the taxes that we would have otherwise paid. The OBR also expects the rate of inflation, so how much prices are increasing by, to be 3.5% across the entirety of this year. It was about 3.8% in October, just a couple of months ago, and that is of course much, much higher than what their previous forecast was back in March of 2025 at 3.2%, and they've also increased what they expect inflation to be for the following years as well. They've pushed it up from 2.5% for next year, whereas before they thought it would be 2.1%, and then 2% in 2027 and the following 2 years. I fully expect the OBR to be wrong on that. They have a horrific hit rate with being overambitious when it comes to both growth and inflation. So whatever they say inflation is going to be for the following few years, expect it to be a little bit worse. And whatever they say growth and our wealth of the economy is going to be for the following few years, again, expect it to be a little bit worse. Finally, the OBR took a crack at employment and unemployment within the UK. If you don't know, about a year ago when Labour first came into power, unemployment in the UK sat at 4%, which is a pretty good number, but nothing incredible. Over the last year, it has steadily increased past 4.2, 4.5, 4.7 or 8%. It's now sitting at 5% just 1 year into a Labour government. And again, the OBR said that they expect it to remain about the same, but it's worth noting that last year they thought unemployment would remain low at 4%, and they've already been off massively on that. So it's incredibly likely that they're going to be wrong here again, and unemployment is going to get worse. Okay, so the forecasts for the economy for the future, they're not looking very good. What about the budget itself? What taxes have actually been raised, and what are we going to get back for the thousands of pounds we're all being expected to pay in additional taxes? Well, let's take a look at what's been raised in particular. Personal taxation, national insurance and income tax thresholds have been frozen for an extra 3 years beyond their already planned freeze of 2028, which will drag more people into higher bands over time. What this really means is that as inflation makes your money worth less, your tax rates are basically going to be increased, but in a stealth way, which doesn't really feel like a tax increase. So this is Labour's way of not breaking their manifesto pledge to not raise taxes on working people, whilst literally breaking the manifesto pledge because they are increasing the taxes paid by working people. Next, they've had some changes to ISAs, individual savings accounts. This is actually a good change. I know, ridiculous. Me saying that the government is doing something good. Basically, there are two types of ISAs. There's one where you just put the money in a bank account and you keep it in savings and you get interest on that money. And then there's the other one, the stocks and shares ISA, which is much better for the economy. That's where you invest the money into a business. It becomes productive capital and helps capitalism and entrepreneurship to spread around the world, and it makes everyone richer. Basically, Labour are reducing the tax benefits you get for using the savings cash ISA, which is good because they're keeping the stocks and shares cash ISA at the standard £20,000 a year tax-free allowance. They're basically just trying to encourage people to invest their money more and save their money a little bit less. That's a good thing. That's good. That follows basic economic principles. So 1 point for Rachel Reeves. She read maybe 1 page in an economics textbook and took away something that she's implemented. Actually done well here. Unfortunately, that goodness gets outweighed instantly by this here. They are increasing income tax. Yep, they're increasing income tax on basic and higher rates. So that's 20 and 40% for income that comes from property, so rents and savings and dividend income as well. What that really means is that if you earn a salary just for the work you do each month, they're not going to outright raise your income tax with this figure here. They will with this one up here. Keep that in mind. So they are still raising your taxes. But if you are a landlord, if you rent out any property, you're going to have your income tax raised. If you have savings, if you've got a lot of cash and you get paid interest on that because you're retired and you don't want to, risk losing all your money in the stock market, guess what? You're going to be taxed more. And if you run a business, in particular, a small business like myself, you are going to have your taxes raised as well. Yes, this is pretty bad because it's just taking money out of people's pockets. Guess what? If you didn't increase that dividend tax on me, Labour, I would just spend that money. I don't make enough money to save £1 million a year or anything. Pretty much everything I make gets spent on the rent for this place and on living and on holidays and investing into the country and businesses and all kinds of things like that. So this doesn't actually help the economy. It helps the government steal more of our money. Next, we have wages, benefits and pensions. So there's, first of all, the 2-child benefit cap has been scrapped. Again, a lot of malarkey has been made about this. This is bad for British people. This is good for foreign people living in Britain, basically. The numbers on how many white British families have more than 2 children is about 14% in the entire country, whereas take a demographic like Pakistanis or Bangladeshis in the UK, and it's 40%. So this is giving 3 times as many benefits to foreign couples who have 3 children, like Pakistanis and Bangladeshis living in the UK, than it is giving benefits to white British people who, frankly, the government ought to be pandering to a little bit more. So this is very, very distinctly Labour pandering to the ethnic minority vote. They know that this is giving out benefits to those ethnic minorities and that those ethnic minorities are going to vote for them in return. This is government stealing money off you and me to give away to ethnic minorities so that they vote for Labour and hopefully Labour stay in power. Absolutely horrific. This is genuinely treasonous in my opinion. This warrants, the complete dismantling of the economic and political establishment in the UK. Next, we have the increase in the minimum wage. So minimum wage is staggered based on how old you are, basically, and it's been raised for both 18 to 20-year-olds and those who are 21 and older. And you can see the figures here, up to £12.71 per hour for over 21s and up to £10.85 per hour for under 21s. This is sort of okay, but it's not great. In reality, these costs have to be borne by businesses, and businesses just put up the prices on their products to make up for the increased labor costs. So this just causes inflation and no one actually ends up richer. A really, really simple analogy to understand why that's the case is if this actually made people richer, raising the minimum wage and forcing businesses to pay people more, why don't we just set the minimum wage at £1,000 an hour? Because then suddenly people are all millionaires and we can all spend loads of money and then businesses can make loads of money. Yeah, well, no, in reality, we just get massive levels of inflation. This will not make people richer. It will increase inflation in the UK. It's bad. Next, we have state pension payments to go up in line with the triple lock policy. So those on a state pension, you're going to keep getting that nice little bit of cream. And then they're changing something for pension contributions. So when you start earning a lot of money, above £100,000 a year in particular, you get taxed an awful lot. And for a long time, you've been able to essentially say to your company, no, I don't want that money in my bank account. I want to put it in my pension instead, and you don't get taxed on it. A hell of a lot of people who earn a lot of money do that because it just saves you 40% on taxes and it saves your money for when you retire. Labour don't like that. They want your money now. They don't want you to save for retirement. They want you dependent on the state so that you vote for them when they give out, nice big benefits. So they are capping salary sacrifice pension schemes to £2,000 a year. Above that, you have to pay national insurance on that. So they're going to be taking a 10 to 15% tax in that sense there. Housing and property, this is the really, really other big one. The mansion tax is coming into force. If you own a property worth more than £2 million, it's going to be revalued in the current council tax system, and you're going to end up paying about 0.1% a year the value of your home, going up to about 0.2, 0.3% if you have a very expensive home, around £5 million or more. Honestly, this isn't actually an awful thing because let's be honest, if you have a £2 million house, you are done all right. I know the argument against this by a lot of people is basically, well, I bought the house when it was worth 300 grand and now I can't afford this tax and it's worth £2 million. Frankly, sell your bloody house then at that point, right? But the big problem with this is that the council tax system in the UK is just absolutely horrific and awful, and Labour had an opportunity here. They had so much public support in the media for just revamping the entire system. Instead, they've just chucked a mansion tax on top, so really not very welcome there. Transport, we've got a temporary cut in fuel duty that's already existed over the last year. They've extended that, so they're not raising the taxes that we pay on petrol. Thank you, I guess. Are we supposed to be thankful that they're not increasing our taxes on everything else? Mileage-based tax for electric vehicles, good thing, very happy about this because, frankly, electric vehicles have been a massive, massive cost for the UK government and for our economy for the last 5 years. We are having our money taken off us, hardworking people, and then given to electric vehicle manufacturers because apparently it's good for the environment or something when we all know it's just not true. And then those electric vehicle owners, they get extra tax cuts and tax credits on top, like not having to pay, road tax like the rest of us do. This is basically changing that. They're going to pay 3 pence per mile. So if you do 10,000 miles a year, you're going to pay about £300 a year in road tax on an electric vehicle. It's good that they're finally getting taxed the same as the rest of us. But it is a shame because a lot of people have been incentivized and basically told by the government, oh, if you don't get an electric vehicle, we're going to charge you a congestion tax and we're going to charge you road tax and we're going to charge you all sorts of other things. And if you want to buy it through your business because you're a company director, you're a small business owner, well, we're going to tax you on income if you buy a petrol vehicle. So the government for the last 5-10 years has been doing everything they can to force you to buy an electric vehicle. And everyone who gave in to the government and said, fine, please stop killing me with taxes, I'll buy an electric vehicle, well, they're now getting taxed as well. So very, very disingenuous in that sense. Regulated rail fares for journeys in England have been frozen next year for the first time since 1996. Basically, this is a price cap on some rail tickets. Will this work in the short term? Yes, over the next few months to a year, rail tickets will be lower in cost. However, in the long run, this will just lead to massive oversubscription for those rail tickets and a massive undersupply. We do not have a privatized rail system in the UK, by the way. We have state-sanctioned monopolies, which is the worst thing possibly to have. Again, Labour had the opportunity to massively revamp the railways in the UK, and they've just neglected their opportunity, instead choosing to just put stupid little communist socialist price caps on something that's just going to cause a bigger problem. Premium cars to be excluded from Motability scheme, which allows people with disability benefits to lease vehicles cheaply. We're going to go over that in a little bit later. Business taxes. This is actually really, really good. And funnily enough, this is a Donald Trump policy that's been stolen by Labour, but no one in the media wants to talk about that. There's something in the tax code called a de minimis exemption. Basically, de minimis in Latin means it's so small that it's irrelevant. And the idea is that if you're a small business, right, let's say I'm a small business and I make wallets, right? I make them with my hand. I don't actually, but imagine this as a handmade wallet and I sell this for £50. If I want to export this to someone in America, there's not really any point in charging me a tariff on this because I'm just a small bloke and I'm not going to change the market in America. So I can export this because it's under the price of £135 without paying tariffs. That's been abused by China over the last 20 years. And they've just been mass manufacturing all of their products. And how it used to work is they used to send 20,000 wallets over in one big shipping container and they'd pay tariffs on all of them. Now, because global shipping is so cheap, they send every single wallet over individually and they don't pay any tariffs. Trump realized this about a year ago and he changed the law in America. He got rid of the de minimis exemption for certain countries, including China, which means that when you buy these, really, really cheap, crappy pieces of clothes that break instantly from China, well, in the past, those Chinese companies have never been taxed. Now they will be. This is a very good thing. Again, I know, rare for me to be saying that the Labour government is doing something well, but we should be slamming China as hard as we can with taxes, with tariffs. They are genuinely an evil enemy of our country, and we need to be doing everything we can to stop our reliance on China. This is a good thing. Gambling tax. So tax on profits from gambling firms. The standard corporation basically tax for this was 21%. It's rising up to 40% alongside getting rid of the bingo tax. Now, getting rid of the bingo tax, I don't actually disagree with. I think it's fine to do that. I don't particularly care too much about it, but it's nice, for those more rural communities in the UK to not be taxed on what is a long-standing tradition that is, a centre of a lot of our communities. So that's nice a little bit. I do also support higher taxes on gambling firms. Gambling is a horrific industry that destroys people. Frankly, the way I would go with this is I would say that British-based gambling firms can pay 0% tax on any income that comes from outside of the UK. But any income from within the UK from gambling, as in these gambling companies are making British people poorer when they lose money gambling, I'm going to tax you at 100% of your profits. You're going to lose everything. Stop making British people poorer with gambling. A 40% is a decent one, but I would like to see it go further. And then we have the tax on these sugar drinks has been extended to include milk-based products. Yes, this is the infamous milkshake tax. You will now be taxed extra money if you want to get a milkshake or a hot chocolate in a cafe in the UK. So that's basically the budget mostly covered. A few things, this is just the BBC's breakdown of it though. They have missed a few things that I want to talk about in particular. Spending cuts. There have been a few spending cuts, but they are very, very few and very far between. And so they are massively outweighed by tax rises. So in fairness, it makes sense for the media to pretty much ignore them. But there are a couple, and I would like to focus on them and just explain the very small amounts of spending cuts that the Labour government have been putting into action. Now, the first thing to note is that we really haven't learned anything about how these spending cuts are going to work. And so in my opinion, they're probably most likely not going to amount to anything substantive because Labour, in essence, is a big state government and a big state ideologically driven party. They're going to really, really struggle to get anything past their backbenchers, which actually includes cutting spending. The main example of this is with PIP, personal independence payments. It's that benefit that's been in politics and in the news a lot over the last year. Basically, people with a disability get an extra benefit on top to give them independence, whatever that means. Labour tried to cut it a little bit before, but in reality, they didn't even try to cut it. They tried to stop it being extended to new people in the future. And they couldn't because the Labour backbenchers, those MPs, the socialists, they rebelled against their own government. Now, PIP, first of all, actually exploded in use under the Conservatives, the Tories. Do not forget that. They caused this problem. Labour just made it worse. Basically because the Tories, they got rid of face-to-face assessments for PIP during COVID. And they never put them back into place, in the 2-3 years after those COVID lockdowns stopped. The cost of PIP in 2019 was £11 billion a year. Last year, when the Tories were still in power for half of it, it was £22 billion. So Tories doubled this disability benefit, which shouldn't really exist in the first place, over the course of 4 years. they are 100% the main party at blame here for ruining our economy. I want to keep that clear. Labour have done an awful job, yes, but the Tories did an awful job for 14 years. They are the predominant party we should be blaming. So they doubled PIP from 11 billion in 2019 to 22 billion in 2024. Under Labour, it was expected to rise to 35 billion by the end of this decade. So in theory, Labour basically announced that they're going to be making it they're going to be reintroducing the face-to-face assessments so that it will be harder to get PIP and so that they'll end up paying out less for it. This, in theory, technically could bring that level of PIP down to the original 2019 level before the Tories got rid of face-to-face assessments. So it could technically save £24 billion a year. That's just not really going to happen though, is it? Let's be serious here. In reality, Labour won't kick anyone off PIP, right? They'll still give all the benefits out to everyone who asks, and this will probably save something in the region of a couple of £1 billion a year. The next thing I'd like to talk about in terms of spending cuts in a little bit more detail is Motability. Motability is, again, a disability benefit, right? It's giving people with disabilities tax breaks when they want to go and lease a brand new car. It's been exposed basically as a massive scam in recent months, with literally hundreds of thousands of people out there with disabilities like alcoholism and tennis elbow or golf elbow from playing too much golf. They're getting free cars. Anxiety and depression, another thing, or another one of these nonsense disabilities that allows people to get these free cars through the Motability scheme. Basically, about a third of every single new car you see on the streets in the UK, that's paid for with taxpayer benefits through the Motability scheme. And on top of that, the benefitees, they get tax breaks in the process as well. Now, Reeves wants to stop this because it's insanely expensive and utterly stupid, but of course, she's going to really struggle because she's in the Labour Party, and the Labour MPs are almost certainly going to rebel against any kind of legislation that tries to actually put this plan into action. Her ideas, though, is that, she doesn't want to scrap the useless failure of a scheme that, Motability is. No, she wants to keep it. She just wants to not allow people to get luxury cars like a Mercedes or an Audi or a BMW through Motability instead. It's barely going to save any money, right? Motability drivers will just be driving a Volkswagen or a Renault instead of a BMW. They're still going to get a brand new car. This is barely going to save us any money. There are plenty of Renaults which are more expensive than the cheap BMWs and Mercedes that people are getting on Motability anyway, right? The other slight change with Motability is that VAT, basically sales taxes, will be payable on these leases, right? So whereby these Motability users the benefits, the people who are already getting the benefits, they used to get tax savings and tax credits and not have to pay tax on top of Motability. Now they're going to have to pay the standard levels of tax. The OBR and the Chancellor themselves, they think they're going to save £300 million a year with this. So a pretty measly amount and pretty irrelevant, to be honest. Next, final thing here, we've gone through the budget there, but I want to point you onto a website, a company called Tax Policy Associates. Absolutely incredible. And this is their report from Dan Needle, this famous tax journalist, basically. The budget, what it says, and in particular, I want to talk about this graph here that he showed. All in all, he interprets this as basically being a tax raise of £30 billion per year that the Labour government have just forced onto us. Last year, they raised tax by £40 billion. They promised us that was it. They weren't going to do this ever again. This year, they've gone and raised taxes by another £30 billion. And this graph here shows you how that's broken up by. So here are all the different ways they're raising taxes. And then each of these represents a different year. So here we are. The green is for next year, the red is for 2030. So fiscal creep, this is basically tax by inflation. So inflation happens, your money's worth less, you get a pay rise in line with inflation. So you're not actually richer at the end of this inflationary period, but the tax levels whereby you start paying 20% or 40% or 45% tax on your income tax, they've stayed the same. So you start paying a higher tax at a lower wealth or income level. That's how much is going to be raised from this. By 2030, almost £13 billion going to be raised per year from this fiscal creep, from this stealth tax on working people. £13 billion a year, and yet Rachel Reeves still has the balls to stand up there and say that she's kept her manifesto pledge and she's not raising taxes on working people. Utter lie. Salary sacrifice and national insurance contributions, they expect to save, make about £5 billion a year here. IT on investment income, capital allowances, electric car tax, you can see all of the numbers here. Most of these are very small taxes. See, the property tax that they talked about there, they're not even going to raise £1 billion a year once they get that into place. It's probably going to cost them £500 million to get it set up because the government's useless with this sort of stuff. So Yeah, absolutely massive increases in taxes across the world. And I really would encourage you to just Google Tax Policy Associates and take a look at this website yourself, because there's a lot of very interesting ideas here. Here's the percentage of income taxpayers who are paying the highest rate of income tax, so 45 pence now. And you see, in 1990, just 6 to 7% of people were paying that highest rate of income tax. Now, it is, this is almost 18, almost 20% of people are paying the highest rate of income tax. So this is what fiscal drag does. It forces more people to pay higher tax without explicitly raising those income tax thresholds or the levels. So, absolutely atrocious. Now, Reeves basically says that she's going to tell the Office for Budget Responsibility, right, that organization, government group that basically make predictions for the economy and inflation and things. She's going to tell them to only assess her fiscal rules and only set out their projections once a year, not twice a year as they're currently doing. This is because back in March, the OBR gave their updated forecast and they were awful. They showed that the economy was stagnating and falling and that everything was going to crap. And they also showed the government wasn't collecting as much tax as they thought they would be. They were borrowing more money than they thought they would be, and that they were going to continue paying more interest on that money that they were borrowing, and that the economy wasn't growing at all and the government thought it would. So this was absolute chaos for the Labour government, and they were basically forced to try and find some extra money or risk breaking their fiscal rules. And so they came up with their plans to cut disability benefits to save money, but the Labour backbenchers rebelled. They overturned the government's attempt to cut that spending. And this cost the UK even more money, right? Because then gilt yields, the cost of our government debt, that increased as it became clear that the Labour Party would vote against any cuts to benefits and would not be able to make the government more efficient or just less expensive. And that then meant the government debt is less reliable, more risky. And so the investors who hold that government debt, they demanded higher premiums and they charged the government more to borrow that money. And that mid-year break basically cost the government close to £10 billion in most estimates. Reeves wants to avoid the cost of that and the political damage of that in the future. So now she's only letting the OBR release their forecasts every year instead of 6 months. Reeves thinks this is a smart idea. She's not. She's an idiot. Genuinely, she's really quite a stupid person. She thinks that the problem here is that the OBR created her crisis. In reality, the OBR just told people that the crisis she created existed, right? Regardless of if the OBR are allowed to tell us how bad things are, that isn't going to make things better. And Reeves is still going to be screwed because she's destroying our economy. And this is like placing a plaster on a sucking chest wound and expecting everything to get better. All in all, the British economy really is on a very bad footing here, right? Taxes are rising massively across the board. 30 billion this year, 40 billion last year, it'll be more next year again, and it's only going to get worse from here. The government can't get the economy to grow because their ideology is explicitly anti-growth, and the only solution for them is to just keep raiding us for taxes, to keep stealing from us and to give it to their voters with things like the 2-child benefit cap, which is why, personally, I'm so cautious with how I try to protect my assets and my wealth. And in fact, I've spent the last 5 years making money and then swiftly and silently protecting that money and my assets and my future, right, from the inevitable, prying hand of the government when it comes trying to take it off me. And so if you want to learn how to protect yourself from the government, from inflation, or even just from market turmoil and economic stagnation, well, I might be able to help you. I'm putting together right now, with the rest of my team, a step-by-step blueprint to follow to protect yourself from this kind of government chaos. And as it's the end of November, near or abouts, I thought I'd run a special Black Friday pre-sale special before it actually goes live next month and give the Offshore Freedom Blueprint away at a massive discount. So if you want to learn more, click the link down below in the description. You can see exactly what the Offshore Freedom Blueprint actually includes, how it works, and if it's the right fit for you there. But be careful because this special offer is only going to last for a couple of days before the Offshore Freedom Blueprint goes up to full price and stays there permanently. So do take a look, but make your decision nice and quickly and click the link down below in the description to learn a little bit more about how you can just protect yourself from this horrific, awful government intent on stealing your money. Labour have just announced a huge crackdown on immigration, the strongest policies that we have ever seen in the UK, except it's obviously all a lie and a scam, and these supposed